Hemphill, who is a film historian and director, as well as longtime friend of the American Cinematheque. So thanks for tuning in. And without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Jim. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jim Hemphill. Welcome to the American Cinematheque discussion of Minari. I am thrilled to welcome two of the filmmakers behind this great movie, writer-director Lee Isaac Chung and producer Christina Oh. Welcome.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks so much for this conversation.
Oh, my pleasure. I love this. I love this movie, and I guess I want to start, Isaac, by asking you a little bit about the writing process, because I would think that when you're doing a movie like this that's kind of inspired by your own childhood and memories and things like that, it would be difficult to even know where to start. So do you begin, what was the starting point for you? Do you begin just by writing down memories? Do you have to think of an overall structure that you're going to fit them all into first, or how do you get going?
Yeah, that's a great question. I started with the memories, just as you said. I sat down, I just started writing memories, but that wasn't even in the service of making a script. I just thought I'm gonna jot down these memories from that time in my life and see if there's a story here. And I spent an afternoon doing that. I had about like 80 memories that I wrote down, and I began to see the shape of a story from that. I realized this is really a journey story about a family coming to this place in Arkansas, where the dad has essentially brought this family here, and that I saw the way that the story might end with this fire, which is something that happened in real life, and ultimately like this plant that grew on our farm that my grandmother brought over. So once I saw like the bigger themes of the film, in that process, I set about writing, and that took me about 3 or 4 months.
And then what kind of factors influence where you choose to stick to elements of autobiography and where you're going to create things from your imagination? How do you find a dramatic shape for ideas and experiences that are so personal to you?
Yeah, I didn't want to be too systematic about that, or set any hard rules. I just felt like once I had the memories down, I needed to allow this family to become its own family, like a movie family. And I decided early on that this is not going to be my family. And I'm going to simply tell a story about this completely new family with a different name called the Yi family. And once I did that, it was very helpful, because I had the memories as almost like a baseline or a foundation for the story. And I was reordering them so that it would take shape in a narrative way. And then all the dialogue, all the personality quirks, all these different things of the characters, I was able to just flesh out in a more creative way. And I injected a lot more of my own personal life and neuroses into the parents, the father Jacob character. In many ways, I feel like that's me. So it's both me and my dad, essentially. So that was an interesting process to go through. Every part of it feels very autobiographical, even if some of the things didn't happen, if that makes sense. It's very personal.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. And so, Christina, how did the script come to you, and what was your initial response to it?
So Stephen Yun and I know each other from Okja when we made that together, and we were just hanging out one day, and he mentioned this script and asked if if it had been sent to me or had been floating around. And I told him I hadn't heard of it, and he kind of explained why he liked it so much. And I was like, and he was like, do you want to read it? And I was like, sure. And coincidentally, that same day, Isaac's agents also had sent it to me. So it was kind of like this, I was like, all right, I got to read this. So, I think after having produced Okja, it was kind of like, there's a lot of Asian material, or, things that touched on that. And at the time, politically too, there was a lot of like talk about immigration and all that. So we got a lot of stories like that. And I think for me, I just never really, all those stories are really important, but I emotionally kind of was like nothing ever really clicked in a way that I was like, oh, I like am dying to make this. Or sometimes I'm like, oh, maybe I'm not the right person to make this. And when I read Isaac's script, I think for the first time, I I connected to it on such a human emotional level. And I think on a personal level, my parents being immigrants from Korea as well, it just kind of like really tapped into something that I had never felt. And so from that point on, I was like, oh, I know, like, I really want to make this, and let's try and make that happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, since you mentioned Stephen Yeun, let me ask about the casting, because the cast in the movie is fantastic, and obviously, you know, the whole movie kind of lives and dies on them. Who was the first person to be cast, and how did you kind of build the cast out from there?
Well, I wrote with Will Patton in mind for Paul, so that was kind of the first step. I think we often forget that, but Stephen was definitely the one who was officially cast first,
Mm-hmm.
and because with that whole situation of him bringing the script to Plan B, and he and I we kind of had a loose family connection already, and we had the same agent, so that all came together in that way. And then the Korean actresses, I was living in Korea at the time, and they came on board through friends of friends as well. So it was interesting. The adults in this film, they were all cast through more of these personal connections, and like Will, I'd worked with Will before. And it was the kids who we had to find a casting agent who could look for these kids through this wide net of a casting call.
Yeah, what was the process like of finding the kids? I mean, I would imagine, to me, looking at this, that would be the most terrifying thing going in, is can you find kids who are going to be able to do this? And you're both nodding.
Yeah, it's almost like the adults were like the easy part almost. And you know, I was so grateful Isaac was already in Korea, and he has a wonderful producing friend named Ina Lee who kind of introduced him to some of the adult, you know, YJ, Yoon Yo-jung and Yedi Han and all of them. And I mean, legends, and so great, and add multitudes of layers to their character. But I think for us, we were like, crap, we gotta like find these kids. I had worked with a casting director on a yeah, on a previous film, and you know, she is also Korean American, and in casting these roles, we knew it was going to be kind of tricky because we needed truly bilingual kids. I mean, and for Korean Americans like me, I can pinpoint when somebody doesn't speak Korean, or, you know, like that was my life, and that was probably Isaac's and Stephen's as well. So it was really important that we find that specific, very niche sort of kid. And so Julia, who is, you know, has Korean background, and she can also identify it. So she went through, and she had like really interesting kind of grassroots outreach. So like Korean churches and Korean after school programs. I think she spent a lot of time in Koreatown, and, you know, posting flyers and stuff, and even reaching out. I mean, we got tapes from Korea. So in that regard, it was a pretty expansive search. But, you know, when we found Alan, it was kind of like, do you remember that day, Isaac?
Oh yeah. I mean, he was so special just in the tapes, where we just knew there's something special about the kid, and we were just unsure because he had never acted before, and he was the youngest kid of all the candidates. So I think our worries were with whether he could stand up to the rigors of a shoot, and we'd have to shoot with fewer hours in the day because he was so young. So those were our main concerns. But it was undeniable that there was something about him that held the screen and made him so interesting and funny and lovable.
Yeah, he's great. And so once you have the cast, what do you do to kind of create this environment for your actors where they can convincingly play a family? I mean, did you have any kind of rehearsal period or time with them before the shoot, or did you just kind of get thrown into it?
Probably a mix of both, would you say, Christina? We had so little time on the shoot. So.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's like an indie film in the truest sense of like everyone just showing up and really just wanting to give it their all. I think we did have like a couple like dinners, or, you know, I recall one dinner where we all went together, and Stephen and the kids and Yeti, and I even think YJ might have been there for a little bit, to just kind of like all be in the same room together prior to shooting. But we didn't have the luxury of time, a lot of time to kind of, you know, hang out as a family. But I do think Isaac created a very, very open and lovely set, like kind of a environment on set. And I think also just our settings themselves kind of just throw you in and immerse you into that sort of life.
Yeah, they all came very dialed in, ready to just jump in and work. And I felt like we couldn't have done this without everybody. They kind of saw the situation from the beginning with the two kids as well. The older actors, they saw the situation. They knew that they needed to help these younger actors along and help them learn how to act. And they fully invested in that project, to the point that by the end, these kids were just so professional and so good. So it was a very giving set.
Mm-hmm. Well, Christina, what you said about the environments helping actors made me think of the fact that, you know, this is a period piece on what I'm assuming is a pretty modest budget, and it's and the period detail is fantastic. And I felt like Isaac really hit the right balance of it being accurate and convincing without getting in the way of the story. You're not sitting there conscious of it necessarily, but it just really seeps into the DNA of the movie. And I'm curious for both of you, you know, Isaac, what your kind of philosophy was about the period detail, and then maybe Christina, from a production standpoint, what are the challenges of doing a period piece like this on a budget?
I credit Young-Ok Lee, our production designer, for a lot of that look of the 80s. And Susanna Song, who did costume, of course, did a tremendous job as well. I basically talked with Young about wanting to do an 80s film, but not letting it scream 1980s, if that makes sense, and something that would not draw attention to itself. And my note on that was that if we set it in the 80s, it will feel more like a timeless classic sort of story, where it's set apart from time in some way. So we just wanted that separation. And it was also a personal choice, because that era of the 80s was an important time for Korean American immigration. There were a lot of Korean immigrants coming to the US at that time. And I guess I was born in 78. My parents came in the 70s. So I kind of remember that area of the 80s. And I think Christina's family came over in the 80s. So there was that personal reason for wanting to set it in that time. And it was an important time for farmers as well. It was kind of a rough time for farming, the early 1980s. So all of that converges within this story, I feel.
And Christina,
yeah, and then to answer the question about, I guess, were you saying the challenges of doing all that? Dare I say, we had less than $2 million to make this, and for me, I think it was really important, you know, and I talked to Isaac a lot about this in terms of like bringing as many kind of Korean Americans or Koreans as we could to kind of, it's almost like for me, it was like, I know that if I hire somebody that's of that background, like it's like a bit of a shorthand. Young-Ok Lee, who was our amazing production designer, she's, you know, she grew up in that time period. She's very familiar with some of that stuff. And also, I think at the time was like going to Korea or had a friend in Korea. So it was like all serendipitous, where she could get a lot of stuff shipped over or she brought a lot back herself, which saved us a lot of money and was able to do it very cost effectively. The biggest thing for me, I think, and just the film in general, was to kind of create a sort of immersive environment, very much in the way that Isaac said. We didn't want this to be like super nostalgic and have that be like an additional emotional layer. I think it was just more like immersing an audience into a set situation and a time period and a family situation. And I think Young did an incredible job with that, just because it's just enough to be like, oh my God, I remember, that's exactly like what my house looked like. And that's already putting an audience member into a mindset of like, that's how I'm going to receive this moment or this scene or this film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, speaking of the immersive quality, there were a couple things that I feel like helped with that. And one was the music. The score is fantastic. And I think, Christina, if I'm not mistaken, the composer is somebody you had worked with on Last Black Man in San Francisco. Is that right? Or am I getting my credits confused?
Nope, you're 100%
Okay.
right. Yep.
So maybe either or both of you could talk a little bit about what the approach to the music was, because I just thought the score really was one of the things that right from the start kind of sucked me into the screen almost.
Well, for Last Black Man, we were kind of in a bind of trying to find a composer super last minute. And I'd reached this point where I was calling an agent friend of mine and just being like, have you even like, I don't even care. Maybe you don't rep them. Have you met anyone cool? And he was like, I just sat down with this guy. And I was like, great, I'll talk to him. And I talked to him, and within like a day, he was able to send me like, I described the situation. He was able to send me a sketch, and it was beautiful. And I was like, whoa, this is crazy. And I sent it over to Joe Talbot, our director, and he, they fell in love and they went right to work. But on Last Black Man, I think Emile had like very little time to score something, like maybe a month or so. It was nuts. And it was super crazy. And then, but he did such a great job that we put him on Kajillionaire, Miranda July's film, and he crushed that. And then when this came around, I immediately, when I read the script, was like, I want to introduce Emile to Isaac. And the idea being putting a composer on way early this time and seeing what Emile could do with much more space and just a little bit more time. So yeah, I don't know, Isaac, did that work? I feel like it might have been helpful.
Oh, working with Emile was, you said Joe Talbot fell in love with him. I fell in love with him too. He's a lovely guy, and he's brilliant. He's just a genius. It doesn't surprise me that I did the Last Black Man in a month. That's insane, but it doesn't surprise me because that's how good he is. And yeah, he sent me 5 pieces before I went into production, like 5 days before production. And I was able to just listen to that stuff every day before going to set. And there were certain montages that I would film in which I would listen to Emile's music beforehand, so I would get a sense of the rhythm and the pace and the images that we might need. Lachlan Milne, our wonderful DP, would also listen to the music too. So the texture of what he did is embedded fully within the film from the start. So when I listen to his music, I just see the movie, and the same way I feel like the movie is inseparable with that music. There's no way to really remember this film without remembering some of that music, because it's so good. I can't say enough about this guy. He's just wonderful.
He's also just a wonderful human being, the nicest guy.
Yeah, he is. He's funny.
Well, you mentioned the DP, and again, another thing that I think really aids in the immersive quality of the movie is the cinematography. I mean, to me, a lot of it almost reminded me of like a great John Ford movie or something. And I'm curious, Isaac, if you had any kind of cinematic reference points or influences, things that you and your DP talked about or looked at that you either were sort of sources of inspiration?
Yeah, we had quite a few different things that we would share with each other. We had a Dropbox folder all through pre-production where we would put in stills from movies that we like, and it was loaded up with all different kinds of references. There were some from that more like 1940s, 50s era of Hollywood, particularly because I wanted to reference like films like Giant and Big Country. Of course, Grapes of Wrath and other John Ford films, they fall into that. But we had some modern films as well. There was some Malick in there. There's this photographer I really like named Jane Rule Burdine. She's a Southern photographer, and I just love the way that she presents humanity in her pictures. So that was another, that was a photo book we had in the office. But we didn't try to hone in on a particular style with this one. We thought we're going to keep it understated and just let it feel like every shot is essential in a way. And we said we're not gonna draw attention to the directing or to the picture, if that makes sense. We want those things to feel like they're simple and essential, and really put the focus on the actors. But Lachlan, he's able to take that and to make it look very elegant, and that was one of the reasons I really wanted to work with him. Everything he's done in the past, I always felt like there's a naturalism, but there's an elegance. Even his commercial ad work that I'd seen, it really shows a certain poetry. And I felt like with this one, he really let it shine, and I was so happy with what he did.
Well, it's interesting, you bring up wanting it to be kind of invisible and focused on the actors. I mean, that kind of simplicity, I think, is a lot harder to achieve than people realize. You have to work really hard to make it look like you're not working that hard. And I'm curious, in the editing process, what the challenges were there with a movie like this, that I feel like it's so involving. And I mean, I never I just felt like it was perfectly paced, where you really let the performances breathe, but it was never slow. How tricky is it getting that balance right in the cutting room?
It was tricky. There was one moment that Harry said to me, what we're trying to do with the edit is to make sure that an audience will never feel as though we accidentally let the edit go a little too long or shot go too long, because once we do that, we'll lose their patience. So we just want audiences to feel as though they're in good hands throughout the entire film. So there was certainly a rhythm and pace to the production and the ways in which we captured moments and the timing of actors and all that. But with the editing, we just needed to try to get it to that point where it feels concise and invisible again. I don't know why with this one, I just wanted it to feel, things to feel invisible, because I just felt it's such a self-oriented film in a way. It's very much based on my life. I didn't want to be self-indulgent, so I just gravitated to the idea of keeping things simple and just letting the story and the characters speak for themselves.
I think we've got some audience questions coming in here, but before I go to those, I'm going to ask, I've got one question for Christina that's sort of a movie business related question, because I feel like Plan B is so good at handling these kinds of movies like Minari, Last Black Man San Francisco, Moonlight, these movies that are very, that are personal films and don't necessarily fit into a mold, and you've managed to find the audience for them. And I'm curious, how do you strategize something like that with a movie like this? I mean, are you thinking about that right from the start when you get the script, or is it more a case of let's just make a good movie and then we'll figure that out? Or how do you, I don't know if I'm saying this clearly, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I don't think you're going to like my answer. I literally just read a script, and if we love it, we try and make it. It's just as simple as that. I think a piece of advice somebody gave me one time was like, if you feel like you're going to die if you don't make it, then go make it. And when it came to something like Last Black Man, I'm not from San Francisco, I'm not Black, but I read that script and I felt deeply connected to the thematic things that presented itself in the script. This idea of does a home define you? I also loved seeing this kind of male friendship that I'd never seen before. Just those types of things that really spoke to me and moved me. And the same thing with this script. I read it and I just found myself incredibly immersed and emotionally immersed in something. And I think for me, that's an exciting aspect of filmmaking. And how do we create that and put that on a screen and share it with an audience? And I think when you read something that's well crafted like that, it's really exciting, and you want to figure it out. You want to figure out the pieces. It's like a big puzzle. But I don't think I think when you start thinking about oh, is there an audience for this? And is this going to market well or something? For me, I guess it just feels like it's tainting the process a little bit. I'm not doing it for personally the right reasons. And so, I think that's primarily personally, that's what's driven me. And I think at the company, I don't want to speak for everyone else, but we've tried to do that over the years too, to what stories do we feel really compelled to tell, regardless if it'll have an audience or not. We just want to do this, or what filmmaker do we really want to work with? And so I don't know, that's kind of like, I hope that answers your question.
Definitely, yeah, no, I like that answer. Okay, well, I've got a bunch of audience questions coming in here, and the first one asks, did the production require actually plowing, planting, and harvesting the fields? And then is the destructive conflagration in the finale real, not CGI?
I guess I'll answer these points. So it's a mix in terms of the farming, what's real and not. Stephen Yun is definitely plowing those rows that you see with that nice overhead shot that we did with the drone. He learned how to do that work, and the farmer who taught him was very proud of him. And so I love that scene. But we basically shot that on one location, and then on another location we went to a place where there was actually a working farm, and it was run by Hmong immigrants who are living in eastern Oklahoma. And they're an immigrant family, Asian immigrant family. They also had a trailer home where their grandmother was living with them, and it was beautiful to see like the parallels of the work that they're doing that we got to really film in that place. And yeah, so those shots where you see the crops, they're already grown. If you go to a farmer's market in Tulsa, you'll be able to buy all that produce from these farmers. So that was a lot of fun to be able to do that in both ways. Have some farming scenes, but then also highlight the work of actual farmers.
And then how about the fire at the end? Was that, they asked if that was real or CGI?
It was
so
real.
That was real.
Yeah, Conley,
I think
special effects guy.
Yep. I specifically remember that day. It was a lot of many of barn fire meeting had. I think we from a producing standpoint, I think when I read that in the script, I was like, do we have to burn it down? Like, is there something else that could happen? But the script is so powerful. We wanted to do it properly, and I don't know. I think CGI fire has come a long way, but still nothing kind of like beats the real deal.
Yeah.
So we scheduled it so that we could burn it. It was a very very powerful day.
Yeah, and that was a barn that Yongok, our production designer, built. So yeah, so it wasn't an existing, we didn't go out and burn an existing barn. I hope no one worries about that. So it was, yeah, that was a stressful day for sure.
Well, now what about the mobile home? Were you shooting in a real mobile home, or was that a set?
It's a real single wide
real.
from that era. Yeah, our line producer Josh Backoff, when he got to Tulsa, he was watching TV from his hotel room, and there's this guy who came on TV saying, you want a used trailer home, come on down. And so Josh immediately called the guy, and we were able to buy one of those homes, actually really cheap. The expensive part of those homes is getting it transported to the location. That ended up being the pricier thing. But Yongok Lee found other trailer homes at that same used trailer lot, and basically took out all this stuff that they were going to junk, and took out all the best stuff and put them into our home. So it's kind of like a Frankenstein home, essentially.
And what did you feel you gained from doing it that way, as opposed to like having a set where you can move walls? I mean, I'm assuming that was a pretty tight space to have a crew in, and it sort of would limit your flexibility a little bit.
I don't know. I'll share a story. When I walked in on that first day, and I walked through, Yongo cleared the set and just said, why don't you walk through it and tell me what you think? So I walked through, and I got to I thought, this is all amazing. I got to the back door and I opened it, and my mind was already in the place of my childhood where I expected to see our farm when I opened the door. But we opened the door and there are like crew members standing there, and it was a shock to me. So I just felt like there's something about using the real that helps us on that more intangible spiritual level, where you capture something that's very real.
Mm-hmm. The next audience question is, was Will Patton's character based on a real person from your childhood?
Yeah, he was. He's kind of an amalgamation of two different people who we grew up with. There's one man was a Korean War veteran who would come and he became good friends with my dad. I could tell that he had lived through quite a lot because of that war. He was carrying a lot, and I think he took a lot of comfort in just being with my dad and talking with him. And then there was this farmhand who worked with my dad, basically became my dad's best friend, and he was a Pentecostal man who would take this cross around town every weekend or so, and that was his church. So he's kind of based on a real person, someone who I actually really respected a lot and loved a lot. So I wanted to start it off with a man like that who seems a bit like a caricature, but really you end up finding that he's got a lot of wisdom to him.
Yeah, I mean, I have to tell you, as a viewer, one of the things I really loved about the movie was you could just feel your genuine affection for all of these people. It was so obvious, and it just made it such a moving, satisfying movie. So that was great.
Great, thank you.
The next audience question, this is for both of you. They want to know what the most difficult part of making the film was for you and what was the most rewarding.
How much time we got for this? I think for me, I'll just jump in. Difficulties, the top ones. So time and money was definitely a difficulty because Christina and I met in February of 2019. I always get the date wrong.
Yeah, like February, March, yeah.
Yeah, we met for the first time, talked about the film for the first time, and then we were in production in July, and then we had the film at Sundance by January. So it was all within less than a year that all of this happened. So that amount of time was just a stressful experience overall. I felt like there was never time to just sit and contemplate. It was always quite a race. But something that I didn't anticipate was the emotional emotional baggage that I was kind of carrying as I was working on this, because it's a very personal film. So even on these interviews that we've been doing on the press tour, like I've just been getting so emotional talking about my grandma, even because I just never in my life have really talked about her that much, but I've just been holding that in. So there are many days on set in which I'd be filming scenes with Yoon Jung, and I would kind of lose it a bit, or I'd have to really choke back some tears and just try to get through it, and be professional. So that aspect of it, I just didn't anticipate, and that was a tough thing for me to get through. But everybody was so supportive and loving that we got through it. Oh, I'm supposed to mention good stuff too, right? Like what's the good stuff? What good stuff? Just a segue into that, it's the people for sure. It was. I just felt like everybody became family on this shoot. It was a very special shoot in that way. Lachlan Milne, he's my Australian brother now. He's the DP, and Young-Ok Lee, and I just remember all the times that me and different crew members we'd go out and have food together. We talk together, and even now I just think the world of all of them. When you're kind of put in a situation where a production is so stressful, and you see everybody rising to the occasion together, it's a very bonding experience, I feel. And Christina too. I mean, we became so close through this whole process that that sort of stuff is priceless.
Christina, how about for you? What was the most rewarding thing, and what was the most difficult thing about the production?
You know, a lot of the difficulties cross over with Isaac. We had, very little time and money, but sometimes I don't really like to think of that as like a negative thing. Like I do think it's like if you don't have time and money and you're still showing up every day, that means like you want it. You're like you want it. And I gotta say, like our entire crew like showed up every day, and it was a huge difficult thing was we were hit with like a crazy heat wave. So it was like 100+ degrees every day, and we're in that trailer and everyone is just sweating and dying, but still showing up. And the grips and the gaffers and everyone's just carrying everything in and setting stuff up, and we're moving. Unfortunately, we have to move at a fairly quick pace to make our days. So everyone's just hustling, and we couldn't be more grateful, even though that's like a very difficult thing. I feel like in some scenes you can definitely feel it. It gets hot in that area. I gotta say, one of the more rewarding things is very much similar to what Isaac said. It's like this bond that formed. For me personally, I think one of the more rewarding things is that I personally, I think, struggled a lot with like sort of my Korean background and like not really fully embracing some things, and working on this film helped me kind of excavate some of that, and like I think like really think about some of that. I think for a long time I kind of lived on the hyphenate of a Korean American. Like I have one foot on the Korean side, one foot on the American side. I'm like sometimes not Korean enough, I'm sometimes not American enough. And so I think for a long time I just kind of ignored all of that. I was like not really kind of embracing an identity sort of thing. And working on this film and working with so many people from different backgrounds, but also different levels of Korean backgrounds, like it was this really great bonding experience, and for me to really kind of connect to my culture in that way, and also just to a myriad of other people that grew up similarly, and feeling very much seen for the first time in a long time. And for that, I will be ever grateful to Isaac. Yeah.
Well, Isaac, that makes me think of another question for you, which is, how did your family respond to this movie, and what kind of conversations did you have with them to let them know you were making it, and what to expect?
Well, in the preparation of the script, I didn't tell them, to be honest. I was too afraid to tell them what I was doing. And I had no idea if this film would ever get made. So I was just working on it for very personal reasons. And I didn't even tell them while we were in production exactly what the story was about. They had their suspicions because it was obvious it was about my family. But the fact that I wasn't even telling them what it was about was really worrying them a lot. But I was just afraid of what they would think, what they would say. And I didn't want to be distracted from what I was hoping to make with this film. I finally showed them in the fall of 2019 after we had a cut, and yeah, it was an overwhelming experience. Really, it felt like it was very cathartic for all of us as a family, and they were very moved by it, and they continue to be so proud of the work. So that means a lot to me. Yeah, I'm sure if this is going to be on YouTube, for instance, my mom and dad are definitely going to see it, because they're like Googling everything now and watching everything. So I have to be careful about how I dress. It's really nuts. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think they should be very proud of it, because again, as a viewer, I thought one of the great strengths of the movie was that both of the parent characters, I completely related to both of them and understood, like when they have those fights, you completely can see both points of view. And I think that's part of the greatness of this movie. But so the next—
I appreciate that. It's tough though, because you kind of want to give permission to be exposed in that way. And I feel like in some ways I'd never asked them for that. So they're honestly being very gracious about it, about letting me show this, and also letting me say that it is autobiographical. So it's a credit to them.
The next audience question for both of you is, what advice do you have for young Korean American film students?
We need you. That's one thing I would say. We need more Korean Americans doing this. I know that there are some particular struggles when it comes to Korean Americans trying to do this, because you have a lot of internal pressure with family, and with the weight of like the sacrifices your parents have made and all these different things. But storytelling is a powerful art, and it's a gift that you can give to people. So I would just say we need different voices, and it's not just Korean Americans. It's, you know, I see the attendees names, and I can tell it's a very diverse group of people, and I love that. I love that there are people tuning in, and you know, I'm sure a lot of them are filmmakers, and we need films that come from all different places, including, you know, Southerners from Arkansas, farmers, you know, even stories like that. So we just really need more of those stories to come out.
Beautifully said, Isaac. If anyone else needs advice, let me know. But interning is a great way. That's how I kind of broke in. But very much what I think, just kind of, you know, stick with it. I think it's really, I totally get that it's probably insanely competitive now, and but in the same way that it's become really competitive, there's also many different avenues you can take. But I do think like that sort of immersive kind of interning at a company you really admire, or in an area that you really are interested in, can kind of put you in touch with people that can help you, you know, get to the next level.
I think we can squeeze.
Don't be afraid to also start at the bottom. You have to start somewhere. Like I feel like I meet a lot of kids nowadays that are like a PA and immediately want to become a producer, and I'm like, dude, sorry, like that's not, like, I don't want to shatter your dream, but like you got to put in the time and the effort, and it can take a minute, but if you stick with it, sometimes it can really pay off.
Yeah, I mean, I just gotta say, to add on to what Christina's saying, that I've seen Christina's work. I just know that she started off doing a lot of internships, and she did a lot of thankless stuff. I mean, she was telling me about the dry cleaning and all these different tasks that she had to do, and she just had to do it really well. And it's amazing to see where she is now, and that's really a testament to the fact that she took those jobs that are not so glamorous and did them in a very, very strong way, and was able to find a way by always being dependable, and all these things. So I do feel like internship is a good way, but you also have to work pretty hard, like Christina here.
Oh, thanks, Isaac.
Okay, I just want to squeeze one last audience question in, because this is sort of, a lot of people are asking this in varying ways. Basically, this person says, Isaac and Christina, I think this is such a perfect film for the time. Why do you feel this film is connecting to so many people across cultures and languages now?
Do you want to answer?
Do you want
to take a stab?
I have like a kind of like cheesy answer. I genuinely feel like it's because we really truly poured like our heart and soul into this film in a very like sort of honest way. And I do think nowadays, in today's environment, people respond to honesty and truth, and sort of like a vulnerable sense of anything. And in our case, storytelling. When we set out to make this film, as Isaac mentioned, it was fairly quick. I don't like, not to kind of I don't want to like downplay like how much we achieved in like less than a year, but it's pretty rare that you can read something and be prepping it like 2-3 months later. It's pretty quick. Like most of the films that Plan B has, we just made a movie that we've been trying for 10 years to make. And it's like a highly auteur lauded film director based on IP that everyone knows. Sometimes it just takes a long time. So for something like this, where it really emotionally kind of and personally hit me, and for then it like all the puzzle pieces to kind of like, it's almost like my life prepared me for this. Like I knew Emil, I had met Harry, Yoon, our editor. I was a fan of Lachlan's films. I had like a weird connection to Young-ok, so I could like, you know, get that done really quickly. Like that's like having that sort of thing happen. It felt very kind of like kismet or touched by divinity in a way. So uh, in that regard, it's kind of like pretty crazy, incredible thing that happened. Yeah, I don't know. Do you have anything to add, Isaac?
I don't, yeah, honestly, I'm kind of stalling because it's hard to answer this question because I don't know how some things take off sometimes. I was proud of the work that we all did, and I felt like we were all being honest. And I hoped that this would happen, but honestly, it's very touching that people are responding to it the way that they are. But yeah, I like Christina's answer a lot, that we really did pour everything into this.
Yeah, and I think obviously Parasite helped kind of break that barrier of like, reading something. But I do think like it's just that sort of, because a lot of people probably did not grow up on a farm, did not grow up live in a trailer, maybe aren't even Korean. I didn't have the same upbringing as Isaac, yet I still connected to it on some sort of visceral, just very visceral emotional level. Like whether it's my parents, fighting growing up, or even just running around outside being a kid, like that sort of stuff like is weirdly universal in its specificity. Like it's kind of bizarre in that sense. And I think maybe that's kind of what audiences are grabbing onto, especially now.
Definitely. Well, we are out of time, so I want to thank you both for doing this. It's been great, and thanks everybody out there for watching. And I guess I'm going to hand it over to Chris.
Thanks so much.
Echoing Jim, Isaac, Christina, this was so great. Thank you so much for doing this and for sharing your time and all this deep dive into this film. And I want to say we love Minari and can't wait for our theaters to reopen when we can finally show it on the big screen, as it's meant to be
great.
So,
Yeah, thank you
so much.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, and thank you, Jim, for moderating.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Jim.
Yep, thank you, Jim, and thank you to our audience for tuning in and sending in all your amazing questions.